Welcome, everyone. I'm Shamar Brossard, and I chair the Education Committee for NICAR.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tuyen Nguyen, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Committee alongside Shamar. We are excited to have you here this morning. The format of our show starts with us beginning the conversation. We want to interact with you as well. So please type into the chat to ask your questions. We are going to answer your questions in the back portion of our presentation. We will address as many of your concerns as time allows. So let's get started with our topic today. Hello to Handshake, navigating the client journey. We are joined by Myra Nimchaiyong, CCIM, a commercial real estate broker who we work closely with on deals. We are going to keep this high level, real world, and practical. Less about legal jargons, more about this actually plays out in reality. Myra, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Myra Nimchaiyong, CCIM, a Chicago-based commercial real estate broker focused on helping clients make smarter, more strategic decisions through every stage of a transaction. I represent buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants with a strong emphasis on deal structure, focusing on due diligence, and protecting long-term value. I'm also the past president of NICAR and actively involved in advancing professionalism and advocacy within the commercial real estate industry. So I'm excited to share with you guys the structure of deal.
Thank you. Thank you, Myra. Many newer agents are so eager to jump straight into writing an LOI, but what do you think are the most common mistakes that happen when they move too quickly without properly qualifying the client and understanding the business or completing the necessary groundwork first? And why is mastering this pre-LOI process so critical to long-term success in commercial real estate?
So in commercial real estate, the LOI sets the tone for the entire transaction. And the biggest mistake is moving too fast without fully understanding the client's business model, their financial strength, what their intended uses, timing, their build-out needs, approvals, and what could make or break the deal, and all of those things that lead up to opening for business. And it can screw up the negotiating terms that might not actually benefit the client that you're supporting. So the pre-LOI process is pretty critical because this is where you uncover the real story behind the transaction. It's like pre-qualifying on a residential deal. You need to know exactly what your client truly needs, what risks exist, what approvals may be required, and whether the economics make sense before anything is put into writing. A strong LOI is not rushed, but built from strategy, due diligence, and clear communication of what your client's goals are.
What are some key documents that can help you properly vet a client?
Key documents depend on whether it is a lease or a purchase, but early on you want to verify like financial strength, the experience that the operator has, and who is actually making the decisions. Other documents may include proof of funds, lender pre-approval, bank statements, tax returns, or financial statements, business plans, existing lease obligations, ownership structure, entity documents, required licenses or use approvals. And in commercial real estate, it's not only the operator or the buyer that has to qualify. Sometimes it's also the property that has to qualify for this existing for this loan as well. So for a lease, I want to understand the business's operating history, what their projected build out costs are, and the strength of the guarantor, and then making sure that the use is legally permitted, because there's a lot of zoning variances throughout the city and the suburbs. And then like for purchase, we obviously want to know the source of funds, financing terms, and a lot of times you won't know that until the buyer selects the asset, but that's part of some of the things that you'll have to talk about before submitting an offer, because just like on a residential deal, on a commercial deal, the offer is just as strong as how you're going to acquire it.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Sorry, there's certain red flags that, that I have noticed that won't transpire into a deal. Like if your clients hesitate to provide basic information, they're unclear of their source of funds, unrealistic timing, or no understanding of what their build out or operating costs will be, changing their requirements, lack of a decision maker involvement is pretty key to show you that this is not going to be a viable client for you, or resistance to any professional guidance. I always say, if your person doesn't listen to you, they're probably not your client. So, sorry, that was it.
No, that's good.
So a lot of times, there's a lot of, when you transition from residential to commercial, the analysis of looking at a property, the math and everything is totally different, right?
Right.
Like how would you analyze a deal, like, if it's viable or not? And what steps do you take to say, that is the deal or not?
I guess it starts with that qualifying portion, and getting to know what your clients are, what their goals are for the next, it's because it's not just today, what their expansion goals are, how long they anticipate this business to be in. So I focus on retail, and a lot of the things that we talk about in retail businesses is that retail is a very trendy way people spend money, and certain concepts in retail have a 5 to 7 year life expectancy. So we're signing leases based upon that. So I don't know if that's kind of getting towards your question, the answer to your question, but
we can go more into that later on.
yeah.
I guess I kind of jumped myself, but I think the question I really want to ask too is that, when you vet your client in residential, usually they go to a lender, get a pre-approval,
Yeah.
and that will be the start. In commercial, we're dealing with, high-level clients where their financials are, could be very confidential. And a lot of times, you haven't worked with them yet. It's kind of hard to kind of get this information from them. A lot of them will you get these answer a lot where they're like, don't worry, we have the money, blah, blah, blah. And they want to start looking at properties. And it's kind of hard to like pull that information up front sometimes. How do you, gauge that when you're in that situation to kind of like, hey, we need all this information up front. I need you to provide this information.
I guess part of the qualifying process that I do does include, the timeline and what your upfront expenses will be, especially once we get into the LOI, from, getting licenses, architects, contractors. We have a pretty good estimate since, I've been representing, especially in retail build out, of how much a build out will cost per square footage for a certain type of business. So we present that to them, and then we have discussions about, and I'm sorry, but I am only focusing on the retail aspect of it, but this is how we guide our clients through like a business, because in multifamily, it would be different on how you're qualifying them on their investment strategy, right? So I do a lot of retail. I do some multifamily, but this is a little bit different. So I guess it's hard for me to there's different qualifications for different asset types, I guess I should say. And the main qualifying factor for me is how they build their business. And once they build their business, what they need and the equipment and how long it's going to take and all of those things, are when we're going to have to start paying rent. So all of those things have a value to it that we put into a number. And, so if you have this is what the qualifications that a landlord's going to look at to qualify for you leasing the space. And on top of that, you need all your build out costs and your equipment to start business and how long it's going to take. Like pizza vendors, sometimes those oven takes months to get. And they have to have a reinforced floor to sit on and things like that. So it just depends on the type of client, the type of investment that they're going to and how we qualify. But every client has to have some proof of whether it be a loan, SBA loan, a construction loan, whatever it is. We help them with that process too. It's not so I guide them from the start to the finish. I work with a lot of first time and small business owners. So there's a lot of guidance, and sometimes we're renting until they can purchase. And then we talk about how long their goal is to stay in the space. It's just an incubator for their business. So what are they going to do next? Where will we expand next? Or do we expand in the same size in a different location? So all of those things are considered in the very first phase that we talk about. And a lot of my clients are opening their fourth and fifth stores with me.
That's great. Similarly, Myra, I've worked with several different clients who, in leasing more of an industrial office space, where they actually were newer business. They've transitioned from other careers and have opened up other businesses. And so they needed to provide a personal guarantee for the lease. They might have incorporated, they've got all their paperwork in a row, but they don't have the history of income from the business. So I let them know ahead of time that they need to be prepared to be able to personally guarantee the lease.
And that guarantee includes the amount of abatement that you're asking for, along with the cost to build out whatever tenant improvement allowance, whatever that guarantee is, or whatever your proof of funds is, has to cover that amount for the entire time that you're going to move forward with a lease. And any type of property, I do a lot of landlord rep, and I guarantee you that unless you're a national tenant, you are going to be providing a personal guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think all of these, are very important in preparing for your client to either their startup or even season. All the financials, all the vetting is very crucial at the very beginning. And if these are not in place and the tone are not set at the very beginning, you are going to go in and try to put in an LOI or anything like that. And then once it comes back and it seems like you are unprepared or not financially stable, your deal would not be considered at all if there's a competitive location that you guys are getting into. So the first thing the landlord rep would ask you is like, well, what's the financial? Who are they? What's their experience and all of that? And if you don't have that, it pretty much shows that you are not prepared and your client is not ready. So it's very important.
Yeah, especially that part, especially because it does get very competitive when it's a space that a lot of people are seeking because of the exposure. If you don't have strong enough financials, it will kill your deal. And you have to be able to present your client in the best light so that they can, the landlord is comfortable with taking them on as a client. I know Tuyen works with a lot of small business owners too, and that's a very crucial part. It will change the dynamic of a deal if the financials are not strong enough to support the space that your client is interested in. It will change it dramatically to where it will kill the deal.
And I want to add too, even if your client is not a strong client or a very experienced client, sometimes when you work with smaller landlord, you can kind of prep them in a sense where they have work experience, maybe not entrepreneurship experience, but you should have an executive summary of, telling a story of who they are, their background, what are their plans, their budget, that whole projection, pretty much, and how they have to analyze that into the space and how long they can sustain there. So a business summary would be very helpful if your client is just starting out as well.
I represented a client that worked at a bar since he was 21, and him and 4 other bartenders grouped together to achieve this SBA loan. And because of that establishment alone, that he was the bar manager, and they qualified to get the SBA to purchase because of that relationship. So, and because of his knowledge of the bar, and he's been running it since he was 21.
And I know, Myra, you mentioned a lot about the SBA. That is one very good resource for you guys to partner up with as well, because that's a whole journey with the 504 and the 7A different structure. But if you understand this, at least you can guide and provide options for your client, and then direct them to the right person to educate them on the SBA option if the financial are not there.
I mean, in commercial real estate, not only are we helping them like grow their business, but we're trying to, we kind of help guide them to invest their money in the right way so that they can grow their business in the future. So how they use money, I try to give them many different options so that they can see what will be the best for them. And a lot of commercial banks will want a startup, especially if they see how good their sales are doing, and they get special treatment and banks have to lend in the area too. So I do a lot of SBA, so sorry.
Deanna, I think we have a question.
We do, and it comes under the topic of verifying funds. So if you're dealing with verifying funds, the question is, how do you have proof of funds that come from the outside of the United States? So have you had any experience with dealing with, out of the country proof of funds verification, or any hiccups in that area?
So I have a deal right now that is stalled for a long time because the funds have to be moved out of the country, because if it's a guarantee, that landlord can't access those funds in a different country. So it will stall a deal, or unless I've done it where they've moved money from that account and started just a escrow account just to have for a line of credit. So it has to be moved into a bank in America if the property is in America.
I also had a deal where the funds were from Vietnam, and they did have the bank statement from Vietnam, and then they took it to the Vietnamese Association to translate the bank statement and certify that as well. And then,
yes, I forgot that you can do that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's one way, and then they'll show write a letter of like how long it will take to move the funds, in a written letter as well. Any other questions? No. Nope. Okay, so that lead us to the next topic here of building the commercial team. Myra, can you briefly share which key professionals every commercial agent should have on their team, and how do these relationships strengthen both client service and deal execution?
So I have a lot of teams, as I alluded to. Depending on the deal. So even my attorneys, it just depends on the deal, the magnitude of the transaction, and what type of transaction it is. And that's who I refer my clients to. And I definitely try to lead the transaction as much as possible, so that the time that it takes to get the information and talk to the right professionals, attorneys, lenders, architects, contractors, zoning consultants, inspectors, accountants. And I work a lot in the city, so I am quite familiar with all of the city officials and economic development teams. We have a lot of economic developers that are a part of NICAR. So having that network is what protects our client, and the timing involved, and then, what they're allowed to do and what approvals are needed, so that it's a little bit more realistic and manageable for them, because at some point they're going to have to start paying rent. So having attorneys that know the system, people in the zoning that can help you out and things like that. And especially when you get into the transactional side, I've had to work with attorneys that didn't know as much, and I try to guide them as much as possible, but they don't really take on our advice so kindly sometimes. So I try to use attorneys that definitely understand the dynamic of the deal that we're doing.
And I also want to add too, I mean, we have different levels of clients that we work with. There are seasoned clients that don't need any hand holding or anything. Then you have someone that's really fresh and new. You want to make sure that you have a couple of attorneys that have different style of working. There are attorneys that, you know, will hold your hand and walk you through the whole process. There are attorneys that are at high level where they don't have that time, and you know, they're the way they transact is, you know, pretty transactional with not a lot of interaction, right? So you want to make sure that you have a couple attorneys, a couple lenders in every field that you work with. It's just not, you know, don't depend on one, and everybody has their own working style to fit your client's need and level.
There was one deal that I had two different SBA lenders work together to do a purchase. So, and I went to one, and I know both of them, and they did the deal together they brought themselves together to do the deal. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. So for newer agents that are entering commercial real estate, what mistakes do you commonly see when they try to handle too much on their own instead of leaning on these professional team members?
I 100% appreciate when there is a new broker trying to get into commercial real estate and they tell me that this is their first deal. And I'll tell them where to go to find the information so that they can facilitate the transaction. But, you know, they try to give advice that they don't really know about to a client, underestimating zoning, licensing, build out, or code requirements, not understanding financing timelines, failing to involve an attorney, lender, contractor, or any other more experienced person for what we're trying to get finished. Commercial deals just have more moving parts than a residential transaction. So a newer agent shouldn't lose credibility by asking for help. They build credibility by protecting the client. It's not about us. It's really about the client. So don't try to look like the expert in every area. Just manage the process, ask the right questions, and surround the client with the right team so the deal has the best chance of closing successfully. And in a commercial transaction, we are way more involved than the attorney is at times, especially during due diligence, especially during attorney review. Our job doesn't stop once we hand off the contract to the attorney. That's when our job begins, because whether it be a lease draft, a purchase agreement draft, that's when the clock starts ticking for our client. So even though we did all this work, you know, once they execute that contract, that is when, you know, the clock starts ticking for them for their build out, their rent, everything. So I think I answered more than
questions. That's very true. I believe if you are, the more involved you are in the deal, the more experience and the more you will learn. If you hand over everything and just depend on the attorney or, whoever the team are involved, a lot of times you're losing out on so much information and not learning the whole process, like the mistake and all the downfall that happens in between. Just be involved. I'm very nosy, and I have. I want to be involved.
Reading 60. Don't you love reading 60-page lease drafts? Have written in 40 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I read the lease and I understand the language. And a lot of times, there's a lot of agents that don't read the leases and they really don't understand all the important terms and clauses within the lease. And these are very important information. And this kind of, give you an idea of is the attorney doing their job? Because sometimes you look at it like, well, the attorney missed this on the lease. How come you didn't address this on the lease? And it's not, there's so many things that you really need to understand and not depend and just hand it off. And that's how you learn more.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there are other points that I've caught in leases or purchase agreements that give me little hints on negotiating other deals that I never thought about too. So
yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So this leads us to the next question. So commercial real estate is, a relationship-driven business. What are some practical ways newer agents can build credibility, create meaningful industry relationships, and earn opportunities to work on a larger, more complex deals?
So when I started wanting to do commercial a long time ago, I didn't know anything, but I sure did join Commercial Forum, NICAR. I went to all the networking events. I started to get to know everybody, and then I started to notice that everybody that I saw in those networking events are the same people that I see everywhere. So I started building relationships with them. I started taking CCIM. I wanted to be prepared if I was going to have conversations with other commercial brokers. And then some of them became my very best friends. And then I could call them up and be like, hey, so I'm doing this deal for the first time. And can you help me or whatever? And like one of my very first LOIs I received from one of our past presidents, and I kind of copied him, and I told him, I was like, look, I stole your LOI. And that was like my first, now I write my own LOIs because it's geared toward every client, but just the basics. So that was like how I started my own LOI. He submitted an LOI for a property that I had, and I was like, hey, I really like your LOI, so I'm going to plagiarize it. But anyway, we're good friends now. But, just asking for help, joining committees, being in commercial environments, taking commercial education courses, because we never stop learning in real estate. I don't care if it's residential or commercial. We've had the most changes in our industry in the last, few years, especially. And it has definitely helped you to develop your skills as a real estate broker, whether it be a residential or commercial. I research the client, not only their business. If it's a new person that I'm meeting, I will go on their Facebook, see, what they like and things like that. And commercial real estate is really about researching, whether it be the property. I use every website or research that I can to research anything about a commercial property. All commercial real estate is really about all the data that you can find to market it. And what else? I think larger and more complex opportunities usually come. I think it took me like 5 years for like somebody from CBRE and JLL to answer my phone calls when I called them.
Yeah.
5 years for them to take me seriously, but I still kept calling until I ran into somebody and I introduced myself, and they were like, Nimchaiyong, oh, we've talked so many times, I know your last name. So, I just wanted to learn. I became a sponge, and I just wanted to be around all the people doing the deals. So that's what I can contribute.
100%. I agree. Deanna, it looks like we might have another question on topic.
We do, and it's kind of timely for what you've been talking about. When you're crossing over from residential into commercial and you're learning and you're doing all of these things, it's about, the question comes in, when does the line get crossed about having ethics, about practicing outside one's experience or expertise? How do you support your learning process while still being ethical and remaining in the safe best practice lane? So do you have any advice on, how to move forward with that?
Absolutely. I grew up in a different time of real estate, so I had to go in person to learn all these classes. So the first thing 21 years ago was like the height of commercial real estate was to get your CCIM. So I went and took CCIM classes. I borrowed money to take these classes, and then the market tanked. But when I got back into commercial real estate, I buddied up with somebody from NICAR, and I just, asked people, if I have a question, would you mind if I called you? And most people will say yes, you can call me. And most people will try to help you. If not, then they're not the person to ask. But I think, as long as in my brokerage, we have a commercial division where I train our brokers to do commercial. And on the very first few deals, they'll do the deal with me until they're confident enough to do it alone. So, find somebody in your brokerage that will do that for you, and somebody that's well-versed in commercial. Or if I started seeing the same commercial brokers, so I just became acquainted with them, and I would try to call them if I had any questions, and some were receptive to it, and I would just call those people. Some were not really receptive to it. They weren't mean about it, but I just knew that they didn't really have time for me. But shoot me a text.
That's where mentorship plays such a role in commercial real estate too, is within your brokerage or within the NICAR organization, working with a very seasoned professional who has the time and desire to help train you and work with you.
But I also want to add to the ethics question part of that is that, if you're representing your client, you want to get into the commercial world, and if you really don't know the financial part of it, and if the deal is going to make or break them, and you don't negotiate on the right terms, and they get into a lease or buy a property where they're losing money, then that's where you know that you need a lot of help before getting involved, because that's the last thing you want to do to a client. And I experienced that a lot of times where agents submit LOIs and really don't know what they're negotiating for, and I feel really bad for them that their client, that they're not being represented well.
I always tell my agents that if it's going to cost your client money, it's going to cost you money. So better to protect them. So, and you have to make sure, somebody wrote a message about you have to make sure with your brokerage too that your errors and omissions insurance covers you practicing commercial real estate, because if you're just starting out, you need to be with a brokerage that has that coverage for you, or you should refer it to somebody else who is experienced in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Got it. So if we move into evaluating, working with clients where they maybe don't really know yet if it's best for them to lease a space or to purchase a space, beyond just the numbers, what business factors or operational goals help you determine whether a client is better suited to lease or purchase?
I actually got a referral, and they were looking for space to lease, and we just couldn't find anything that worked out for them, and they were on such a time crunch, and I found them a warehouse to buy. And the numbers worked out the same. They just had to come out with a larger down payment, but what they would have spent in build out other places, this place already had, and it just worked out better. So it depends on the financial aspect of your client's business, right? So you find those things out in your first conversations with them when you qualify them, or you have that pre-LOI. I don't really call it a pre-LOI interview, but when I start working with a client and start establishing a relationship with them, that's part of the process where, time matters, finances matter. And if we can do this, can we put you in an SBA for 10% down, and you have less build out money, but you're paying less rent because now you're owning it. So
yeah, and that's where also that having that team, though, that you also have grown as a commercial real estate practitioner, where I know I've been able to reach out to that lender to say, listen, we're not at the stage of introductions yet, but I am looking at this property with them. Can you help me understand, how this position?
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So the next question leads to falling back to Myra, myself, and many others, where we invested a lot of money and time into our CCIM to be at the level we're at to really give back to our client, represent them, and protect them, right? So, the financial concept and calculation should, what are the concepts and calculation commercial agents should understand to properly analyze and compare the true cost and learn long-term impact of leasing versus ownership?
I'm sorry.
So pretty much what kind of financial concept or calculation do we use in our daily practice to analyze a deal if it's a purchase or if it's good for a purchase or a lease?
And this is why I got confused, because I started to answer your question in my head. And I stopped listening to what you were saying.
I messed up at the beginning, sorry.
So, because with our CCIM courses that we learn, there's a financial analysis, whether lease versus buy option for our clients. And it does allow you to computate, what the mortgage would be compared to what the leasehold would be for whatever amount of years, and what their return would be towards their business. Because there's other things that your clients can get deductions on if they purchase the building for their business, that like cost segregation and things like that, that might equal out to what their lease would be too. So, I try to, that's why having, attorneys and accountants and lenders that understand those dynamics is key.
Yeah.
But yes, we do in CCIM, they do have a financial analysis portion where it does teach you how to compare both.
Right. And having that knowledge of really analyzing to, the T of hey, if a 10-year lease is going to cost you this much, and if I'm paying rent for each month for the lease versus buying a building and the mortgage would be X amount of dollars, and it's, in the long run, after 10 years, what are the tax benefits, write-off, leverage, financing, and, after 10 years, what are you pocketing at the end of the day is the analysis that any investor will want to know or already know. So, if you don't know this and your client knows more than you, then it's a sign that, it's not going too well.
And you can start to see in the conversation if your client knows more than you. And the smart thing to do is find someone else that knows more than you to be a part of the deal. So we do share a lot of, I think in commercial real estate, it's a lot, we have a lot more collaboration in co-brokers than, because we will do it on the buy tenant side as well, where we'll have multiple brokers on one representation, where, on a residential deal, there's only one buyer rep and one tenant rep, where, in commercial, it's a little bit different. So.
Okay. So when we're moving forward and we're looking at properties, why is it important to understand the zoning and permitted use?
Because it could delay a business license and you won't be able to open for business. So it's kind of a catch, right? Like Tuyen and I do a lot of service-based businesses, and you have to execute a lease before you can apply for a special use permit, but it's kind of backwards, because if you execute a lease, then that tenant is tied into that space and that lease, even though they can't open for business. So you kind of want to get in front of that before and submit applications and business licenses on a what space that you might consider going into, and sometimes in certain areas, I represent a lot of dental and medical clients that like to go in the retail space, but like in Oak Park, there's certain blocks that they won't let them go into unless they have a retail aspect. So they would have to sell glasses, or they have to sell cosmetics or whatever it is to be on that on say Madison Avenue. And so those things matter when you go into a lease. I actually had, a lease that we signed that was originally an office space, but they had some retail component to it. And we had a nonprofit go in, and the village knew both the owner and the tenant very well. And they literally moved 2 doors down because the other owner was selling the building, and they didn't issue them a business license. So Franklin Park is a little bit different. It's a smaller village. So both owners, the owner of the business and the owner of the space, were able to meet with the village, and they allowed them to move forward and issue a business license just for this particular, because they were a nonprofit and the village liked what they were doing for the community. So they extended a special use for that retail space to be just office.
So go ahead,
we
sorry.
didn't know that was going to happen either, because we were a direct office and they were moving 2 doors down and had no issues. But because of the transition, there was an issue. It could have almost killed the deal. And, the tenant already built out and the landlord already signed the lease to them. So, but they were able to work with the village because of their relationships with the village.
And on that topic, so what was your role in that particular instance? Like, was there something that you did to help advocate for your clients? Did you know what I mean, when this started to kind of fall apart?
I represented both the landlord and the tenant.
Okay.
And they were already building out and signed a lease when this happened. And none of us thought it was going to be a big deal because the previous business was a production company and they didn't have a lot of retail sales tax going in and out of there anyway. And this other tenant moved literally 2 doors down. So we didn't think that there would be an issue. And both the parties were very well known in the village. And then somebody at the village was like, no, we denied your business license. And so then they met. So did I check with the village? I don't remember, but it was such an insignificant amount of retail sales tax that my client, the landlord, was spending with the village, and the other tenant moving in was a nonprofit. So I probably could have checked with the village, but we didn't think that it would be an issue because it was literally 2 doors down in the same type of business.
Right. Yeah. How important do you feel like traffic counts are, and the neighboring demographics, customer behavior, or nearby competition? How important is that when you are looking at properties?
It's very important, especially, we have 77 neighborhoods in Chicago and a lot of them are different. And our neighborhood trends change quite dramatically. Like Randolph used to be Restaurant Row and now it's Fulton Market. So, and businesses will move towards that just to be next to the other businesses that they're used to being around. So in my world, in retail, it is very important. Location is very important to them. And it depends on what kind of, some retail businesses don't require traffic flow and some do.
How do you build out costs, permits, city approvals, and code requirements affect a client's ability to successfully lease or purchase?
So a client may be able to afford the rent or purchase price, but if the build out is too expensive and the permits take too long and they have to start, or the space needs major code upgrades, the opportunity may not be realistic. So you should try to identify these issues early and bring in contractors, architects, and zoning professionals as needed. Your goal is to understand the cost, the timing, and the feasibility before the client even writes the LOI, let alone sign or spends money or commits to terms they can't support. There's in different types, because we represent different types of retail businesses, their built out structures and requirements are different. Most, restaurants will need special drains, grease traps, and things like that. So sometimes it's a lot more expensive to trench a drain in concrete than to drop it under a basement. So.
On that topic, Myra, because we are talking about the transition from some agents from residential to commercial, can you just go a little bit deeper on, you mentioned, bringing in like architects or other professionals to do some evaluation of the space, help the residential realtor understand a little bit more of what that looks like in the timeline of, the LOI?
Typically, we'll take a tour through the space, see what the space needs, and we'll try to select a space that either is better by location or requires less build out. The next appointment would be to bring a contractor in to see what their estimated cost of build out will be before. We try to do it before we prepare an LOI, but some businesses already anticipate what their business, their build out cost is going to be, and they already know because they've done them many times. So that process would be a little bit shorter, and we wouldn't have to bring somebody in right away. And also depends on the space, like I work with some franchisees where their kitchen specs are extremely accurate and it has to be fit into that space. So sometimes they have to bring their engineers to do not only the architect, but their engineers to look at the space as well. So it just depends, different dynamics, different people involved, but you want to get them in as early as possible so you know what the appropriate costs and expenses you're accumulating will be before you start, and how long it's going to take before you can start.
Yeah.
So it kind of crosses over to my next question. How should agents guide clients into evaluating not just the opportunity to open, but also long-term scalability, resale value, assignment flexibility, and exit strategy if market conditions or business performance change?
So because I deal with retail clients, we don't just consider their opening day, but evaluate whether the space supports long-term growth, flexibility, exit options, and what that neighborhood will trend in 5 years. So like I said before, I've experienced retail trends 5 to 7 years. That's the sweet spot for what we sign for leases. And that either at that point means that looking at expansion or lease assignment rights, or can they go into a different space with better options and get more TI because the lease is up? Are their renewal term is better in the existing space? What the resale value would be if they moved out of the space. Parking is always important in Chicago because there is barely any. Mechanical infrastructure and whether the location adapts to the business changes. Halstead in Lincoln Park used to be a booming retail area. Now it's Southport, but on Southport, it's only like 3 blocks long. So, so what the client might need today in a space in this location today might only work for 5 years. So then, or if they don't need as much space, do they bring in a partner? I've done a lot of collaborations for multiple retail businesses where we have 2 different concepts into one, just because it makes the cost on the tenant a little bit lower. So the goal is to help the client make a decision that supports both the current opportunity and the future of the business. And sometimes my clients will go in half the size of a space just to be on Damon Avenue, close enough to North Avenue, where they are going to pay $5,000 more in rent, but they're also going to pay $5,000 less in social media advertising.
Yeah. All right, Deanna's got her hand raised.
We get a couple questions. The first one is about sharing the coverage on build-outs. Is it common for a landlord owner to cover some or all of the build-out? And is this negotiable for as a common request from a tenant to have some of that covered?
Yes, you can ask, but what the landlord is looking for is how many terms you're off, how long the length of the term that you're offering, how much you're offering in rent, and also your financial credibility. So a landlord will drop down how much tenant improvement allowance he'll provide if your financial credibility is not that high, because they don't think that they'll get the money back in rent for the money that they're providing to the tenant in tenant improvement allowance. So it just depends on the tenant and the deal structure to get any kind of assistance. And also the space. Like some landlords know that their space needs a lot, and if it's usually a larger landlord, they have the capability of providing a certain amount in TI. But if it's an individual private landlord, usually they don't have that extra money to provide you in TI, but they will give it to you in other ways.
Myra, can you briefly explain tenant allowance improvement, what that really means to those that really don't understand how that works?
So tenant allowance is X amount of dollars that you negotiate for the landlord to provide to the tenant to help them with their build out. Say they need a new bathroom because it's not ADA or whatever. So you're going to ask the landlord for X amount of dollars. And you can ask the landlord to provide these things instead of a tenant improvement allowance. Like a lot of developer landlords will rather bill out the space for you and charge you a higher market rent than provide tenant improvement allowances. And sometimes your build out, it would just work better with one contractor doing all the work. So you ask for a tenant improvement allowance.
So that money will be reimbursed back after you complete the whole build out?
Yes. It usually is reimbursed once all liens are released.
All right. Deanna, do we have another question? I know we're getting close on time.
That question is about commission. So I think that's appropriate to answer that after the webinar. We've got just a couple minutes. So if we can, we will address the question. We'll send it out as a general answer after the webinar. But if you can wrap it up, that'd be great. We got a couple, if we can squeeze in a couple extra minutes for a couple other topics, then we're good to go.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today and for being such an engaged part of today's Commercially Curious webinar. We truly appreciate the thoughtful questions and insights that you brought to the conversation. And we know that we didn't get to everything, but the curiosity doesn't have to stop here. If you still have questions and want to learn more about NICAR or need support, please reach out to us at curious@nicar.com. We'd love to keep the conversation going and continue learning together. We also hope that you'll join us next month on June 25th at 10 a.m. We will be discussing commercial real estate research toolkits and how to build yours.